Hi, this is Dr. Joe Green, head pastor of Antioch Assembly Church located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Also the founder of the 2019 movement. And I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. You know, right now we live in a very tricky time. And if you've been following the 2019 movement, I try to pull back the cover on some of the great deceptions and strategies that have been perpetrated against not only people of color, but, you know, the population as a whole, because we understand that there's a group of people out there, the ruling elite, the globalists, the international bankers, whatever you want to call them, that have an agenda. And their agenda really isn't in the best interest of, some people would call us the 99 percenters, or, you know, the working class, or whatever the case, you know, whatever term you want to use. But I wanted to talk about what's a revolution without tears, or a revolution without guns or violence. That's one of the strategies that was employed by the globalists in the beginning of the 20th century and the end of the 19th century. So I'm going to lay out some of the things that we see here, some of their agendas, some of their plans. They've written about it, and it's pretty well known, you know, to those who have been paying attention, those who have their eyes open. It's a shame, because a lot of people, especially people of color, the ones who are impacted the most by these strategies and agendas, are normally the ones that are the most ignorant to these devices. You know, the Bible even tells us not to be ignorant to the devil's devices so that he doesn't gain the advantage of us. So, you know, this channel, if you've been following it, is to inform, to educate, to open the eyes of people to see the underlying strategies that are being perpetrated against us, the common man, if you will. And again, a lot of my commentary is directed more so to the black people, and probably you could categorize black and Hispanic or other minority groups, primarily because of all the strategies that are employed. We have been getting hit the hardest by those strategies, and there's a reason why. And like I said, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can go to my Patreon if you're interested in helping to support the 2019 movement. I think it's a timely movement that's really doing some great informing, you know. And the reason it's so important to educate ourselves and to change mindsets and worldviews is because in order for you to have any type of action or mass movement, you first have to change the mentality or the mindset of the people. The powers that be know that, so they have been very strategic in helping to shape and form public opinion to their benefit. So if you look at mainstream media, if you look at arts and entertainment, you know, there was this, there's an ancient writing of Socrates and Plato and some of those philosophers. And so Socrates talked about the Republic, and he talked about a society and how a society is formed and how a society should be successful. So he broke it down, and I'm paraphrasing, of course. He broke it down into three major groups. So you have the governmental people, which is like the ruling elite, or, you know, those people. Then you have athletics and entertainment. Now, of course, during his time, he had a different terminology he used, but basically that's what he says. He says, so you have a ruling class or a government class, and the government class has an agenda. They're the ones who put things in place to shape and to mold society's direction, and then they use the entertainment and the athletics, the people that are in athletics, they use them in order to help shape public opinion and to push their agenda forward. And that's what's happening here in America. If you understand the organization, there's a shadow government, which is a government behind the government that you don't see. It's really a part of the globalist agenda. And they use our politicians, which is our ruling class, if you will. And they also use people in media, entertainment, and athletics in order to promote their agenda. So that's why it's important for us to look behind the scenes, to pull the cover back so we can really see the strategies for what they are. So right now you see in our public, there's a constant attack on family values that's taking place in the country. Everything that was considered good and moral now is being attacked. So women being modest is now a bad word, or you're being oppressive, if you will. You know, if you say to women or the culture as a whole that women shouldn't walk around being super sexual. They say you're being oppressive and a woman should express themselves sexually. But then we see on the other side, you have this Me Too movement. So in the Me Too movement, they're saying that women are being victimized, they're being mistreated, mishandled, they're being approached inappropriately and harassed and all these things. But you have to understand that that's a byproduct of a culture where women are being over-sexualized. And so, and this is not, of course, blaming the victim by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just common sense. I mean, if you teach women to be super sexual and hypersexual, you are sending a message that that's how women want to be treated. So then on the other side, when women are treated as sex objects, then there's this outrage as to why these, you know, barbaric men are mistreating women. But that's what the culture has dictated or designated. And men are very reactive, especially in those type of instances. They take their sexual cues a lot of times from women. So if women are sending a signal that they want to be hypersexual, or, you know, you figure some of these singers, Beyonce, Madonna, Miley Cyrus, they are very hypersexual in how they dance and how they dress. And so they're sending a mess, and other women look at them as heroes. So with this feminist movement, they look at these women as heroes because women are expressing themselves sexually. And then on the other end, they are hijacking male masculinity a lot of times by playing the victim. You know, and again, this is not a sexist rant. Like if a woman is being harassed, sincerely harassed or mistreated or touched inappropriately, then a man should be brought to task. But I'm talking about the culture as a whole. So anyway, but this is all part of the strategy, and so I'm going to lay it out for you. You know, when we talk about attack on the morals and the family values that we have held for so long, saying that people should be described based on their biological sex is now considered hate speech. Saying that marriage should be only recognized as one man and one woman is considered bigoted, homophobic. Calling a violent street gang like MS-13, like President Trump a couple of weeks ago called them animals. Calling this violent street gang, MS-13, if you're not familiar with them, they're extremely violent and really just really brutal. They rape, you know, there's a lot of records, you know, police records and stories of them raping, killing, torturing people. They import large amounts of drugs into the country. And so the president called them animals. And so there was this outrage by the liberal left media that, hey, you shouldn't call people animals. And it's, you know, but what about the victims of those crimes? What about the people that have been tortured or raped or the children that's been killed because of these MS-13 gangs? And this is all strategic when they set this tone in where there's always this victimology, right? So they teach victimology, which is they always create a victim mentality and a victim class in order to manipulate and control the narrative or public opinion. So what they did was they lumped MS-13 in as Mexican because it's a primarily a gang that came from Mexico. So they lumped them into Mexicans. So when he called them animals, they were implying that he was calling all Mexicans animals, and it just wasn't the case. But that's part of the strategy that they've been employing for some time. We should realize that all these things are not by chance. They're not a coincidence. They're not a grassroots movement. That most of these are very well orchestrated. There has always been a ruling class or a upper class, a ruling elite class that existed since the beginning of recorded history. So you had the pharaohs, you had Caesar in Rome, you had monarchs and kings, and throughout history you've always had a ruling class of people, and then you've had other classes. So in this country we have the wealthy, or the top 1%ers of wealth. You know, we have our ruling class, if you will, our politicians, especially the career politicians. They can be somewhat considered like a ruling class. Even though in our representative republic there's a exchange of powers from time to time, and just because you're in power now doesn't mean you're going to be in power in the future. But there are certain classes of people. But the beautiful thing about representative republic, the type of government that we live in, which is a free market capitalistic system, there's an exchange of classes. So you can start in the lower class and work your way up and become middle or even upper class. You know, you think about the story of somebody like a professional athlete, like a Michael Jordan, who came from a, you know, probably average, ordinary family, but now he's extremely wealthy. Or LeBron James, who came from a single family household, now he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You know, that's only possible in a free market economy, where you have competition. You have people that are not necessarily paid their worth, but they're paid based on what the market dictates. So, and the reason I say that is because a professional athlete worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and you could have a school teacher who taught school for 40 years, and how many students have they taught and helped to build up, but yet they would only get maybe $60,000 or $70,000 a year. So these athletes aren't getting paid what they're worth, but they are getting paid what the market dictates. So, and that's fair, because that's what, you know, that's how our system is set up. It would be better if school teachers could be paid huge amounts of money as well, but unfortunately that's not how our public school system is. Now the university level is a little bit different, but the average school system is a little bit different. So there's always been a ruling class, and some now call this international ruling class, they call it the Illuminati, the global cabal, the international banking cartel, or there's other names that you can call them. They actually describe themselves as Illuminati, because they are illuminated, which means they have the secret knowledge that allows them to be like God figures in the earth. So when we talk about Illuminati, that's who it is. It's a secret organization, a secret cabal. If you look at the international banker, the Rothschild banking cartel, international banking cabal, if you will, that's the primary tool of these groups, because, you know, like the Bible says, the love of money is the root of all evil. So money is one of the key components in power and control in this world system that we live in. And because they are the ones who control most of the international banking interest, they have a lot of power and influence. It's easy to bribe people or get people to be a part of their conspiracy because of the great wealth and how they control most industries. I call them globalists, but what they are basically is they're Kabbalists, and they believe themselves to be gods on the earth. They truly believe that they deserve the resources of the world, and that the vast majority of humans are like human weeds that will drain the best resources from those that truly deserve them. And again, I'm not speculating or just making this up. This is actually what they believe. The term human weeds is one that even Margaret Sanger used, and we'll talk about her a little bit later. But you know, if you look at Charles Darwin wrote a book called The Origin of the Species Through Natural Selection, or The Race to Preserve the Favored Races in the Race for Life. And so that was based on this kind of global elite philosophy, and he just broke it down by races. So he said certain races of people are more valuable than other people. That's where we get our theory of evolution from. It's based on Darwin's Origin of the Species. And so when you talk about racism, that's the very principal idea, foundational idea of racism, which is there's certain races of people that are more valuable than others. They practice these Illuminati, globalists, Kabbalists. They practice Kabbalah. There's certain rituals that they practice, that they learn this ancient knowledge. They believe that they're descendants of the pharaohs and some of the other ruling classes, ancient Sumer, some of these other kingdoms that were based on occultic magic. And so they have these secrets of the occult rituals and magic that they perform. And they also employ other people and other organizations that are their tools that they use. In the music industry, there's musicians that are puppets for them, and then they help to promote their agenda. If you look at mainstream media, it's owned by these large multinational companies that are owned by these ruling elite families. And so they practice secret rituals, and they suppress knowledge from the rest of humanity and information, because they don't believe that the masses are smart enough to be able to understand those, or to handle it, or they don't deserve it. At the end of the day, they worship Lucifer as the god of this earth, and he's the giver of knowledge. He's the light bearer. That's what Lucifer's name means. So they believe that Lucifer is the head of the New World Order, or the one world governmental system that they are trying to push forward. And they believe that they should get the population to and maintain the population of the world to about 500 million people. 500 million, they believe, is the ideal population size for the world in order for them to have all of the resources that they deserve, and then they use the rest of them as almost like miners or farmers, right? So the rest of the world, the other, you know, say 499 million, and I'm just using that example, would be kind of like their, almost like a farm animal. You know, like if you had a mule or a donkey or a horse, and they help you to till your farm or do whatever you need to do. That's kind of how they look at the rest of society, as chattel property, almost, to be manipulated. And you'll hear terms in like sustainable development, globalism, global economics, you know, a global economy. You'll hear these type of terms thrown around a lot in mainstream media, and if you don't really understand the plan behind what's going on, then you may miss that. So when they talk about the UN, the United Nations, and global warming, they talk about what's called sustainable development. And what sustainable development is, it's a kind of euphemism for population control or eugenics, because what they're saying with sustainable development is that there is a certain that the world is becoming overpopulated, and so because they're saying it's overpopulated at a certain level, it's unsustainable. So sustainable development is a euphemism for eugenics or population control. They have something called Agenda 21. They now call it Agenda 30, which means they want to have their plan fully implemented by 2030 for this, you know, how they're going to control the world. Now, by the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, you had the world population was growing exponentially. So you had breakthroughs in science and technology, and you know, you had these cities that were being created in the industrial age that made life a little bit more manageable for the average person. So people's life expectancies were being extended. They were living longer. People's quality of life was getting better, and because of that, the population of the world was exponentially growing. And so these Illuminati people, the global cabal, they were getting kind of uneasy because it's harder to control and maintain a population that's, you know, going from, you know, a half a billion to 3 billion to now in 2018 it's about 7 billion people on the earth, and it's harder to control and to maintain that population. So they began to do things to study and how to control the population and how to reduce the population. So they realized that they had to strategize on how they could stop the rapid population growth and control the population in order to control their agenda. So they really, during the time of Enlightenment, they did a lot of studies on human psychology and how the human brain works, and a lot of that was done in order to learn how to control the masses. And so you had Sigmund Freud, you had Carl Jung, you had some of these B.F. Skinner, some of these behavioral psychologists that they start to study how the human brain works, and then they use a lot of those tactics in order to employ them for mass mind control. They developed a system, a governmental system, a world governmental system, and they called it communism. So communism is an offset of how they were perfecting their ability to control the masses. So communism's ultimate goal is for a universal government that will be worldwide, right? That's why the communist regimes, a lot of them went into kind of empire building. So they went into start taking over other countries or trying to spread communism around the world, because their ultimate goal of communism is a universal worldwide governmental system. You know, the Bible talks about Mystery Babylon and the one world government that's at the end of the age. Communism is actually another name for that particular system. One of the most influential people and revered illuminists was a man by the name of Albert Pike. He was a 33rd degree Freemason. He was the founder of the KKK, and he was the architect of the strategy to usher in the New World Order by the 20th century. You may or may not be familiar with Albert Pike. There's a statue, is a huge statue of Albert Pike in Washington, D.C., which tells you just how influential and that Albert Pike actually was. There's a huge statue of him in Washington, D.C., and I believe that there's a building or a couple of buildings named after him as well. So he was the architect of ushering in the New World Order in the 20th century. Now, of course, it didn't happen the way they wanted it to. They're a little bit behind on their schedule, which I believe is why Agenda 2030 is kind of such an urgent plan. So Pike also wrote a book called Morals and Dogmas. Morals and Dogma is considered the Freemason Bible. And by most, it's considered the Freemason Bible. So Albert Pike was a 33rd degree Freemason, and he came up with a strategy not only in pushing the one world government, but also how to get Masonic organizations under the control and manipulation of what they call the Illuminati, which is also a secret society. And it's based on the ancient mystery religions from Babylon and from Egypt. Now, Pike was so influential, like I said, that he employed his strategy, and they found a letter that he had written that he has been attributed to writing in 1871, and he outlined their plan for a new world order, and it was based on 3 world wars. So he had strategized that there will be 3 world wars, and the 3rd world war was going to be the one that they actually used in order to push the new world agenda and to solidify the one world government. So you had the first 2 that have already been, have already passed. Those first 2 went right in line with what Albert Pike's strategy was, except for the first one, which of course Germany, the Rothschild family, the Illuminati, the global elite, their basically home base or headquarters was in Germany. So the Rothschild family is German for Red Shield. And so Germany was kind of like the foundational point of the New World Order. So after World War I, Germany wasn't as successful as they wanted to be in helping to push forward this one world governmental system. Of course, the Allies kind of split Germany up, and actually I think that was after World War II they split them up. But anyway, you had the Second World War, which was to push in a Zionist state, which is the nation of Israel currently, and the Third World War was supposed to employ the Muslims. So the Muslims, the Muslim nations, is a tool of the global elite in order to push the one world governmental system in play. So they use this whole thing as a way to incite the Third World War so they can push their agenda in place. Now, this is all part of Pike's letters, and so if you get a chance, there's a gentleman, can't think of his name offhand, but he wrote one that's called The Prince of This World, Satan, who's the Prince of This World, and he also wrote a book called Pawns in the Game. And so in one of those books, I have both of them. One of them, he actually has Pike's letter as it was written that outlines their strategy for the 3 world wars. Now, things like eugenics, mass mind control, there was a thing called propaganda that you may have heard that the Nazis in World War II perfected what they call propaganda. It's now called public relations. And those were all things that they used to perfect. They perfected these strategies in order to push the New World Order agenda. The Nazis were very instrumental in developing tools such as eugenics, which is another name for racial or ethnic cleansing, mass mind control using the media, and they developed the effects of certain chemicals that certain chemicals have on the brain. Most of their experiments were funded by the Rockefeller family. So you had Joseph Mengele, who was a Nazi doctor who actually received funds from the Rockefeller Family Foundation to do these studies on how to promote and to push the one world order. A lot of like our information about nerve gas and other chemicals and how it affects the body, they got it from the Nazis. Like I said, it was funded by the Rockefeller family. The Rockefeller family also funded Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood. It was called the American Eugenics League. Then they changed it to the American Birth Control League, and now it's called Planned Parenthood. But it was originally funded by the Rockefeller family because Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist. She believed in reducing the population. Well, you have eugenics, you have good eugenics and bad eugenics. So good eugenics is when you promote or you encourage the good races of people to procreate and have a lot of kids, and you discourage the lower races of people to have babies. You discourage them from having a lot of babies. So that's what eugenics was about. And she included people of color, black people, certain poor people, and people that were like mentally challenged or handicapped or whatever. She considered them human weeds, and so she discouraged them from procreating. And so she came up with the strategy of Planned Parenthood and abortion on demand, which Planned Parenthood either attempts to keep you from getting pregnant, or if you get pregnant, then you go in and you kill the baby through abortion. That was her strategy. And now, because Planned Parenthood is so devious that even when they give out free birth control, a lot of clinics they have found was giving diluted birth control pills. So the woman goes in and she gets birth control pills thinking that she's not going to get pregnant, but because the dosage is diluted, she gets pregnant, and then she goes back and she pays money to Planned Parenthood to have an abortion. So again, the love of money is the root of all evil. So they have all these devious plans that, and again, all this is documented. It's not anything that I'm making up myself. So at the end of World War II, you had this thing called the Operation Paperclip. So the U.S. intelligence agencies called Operation Paperclip, where they got a whole lot of these Nazi scientists and they brought them to America, and they took their research and they used it to perfect their strategies. And Columbia University is a big stronghold for, Tavistock Institute and the Frankfurt School and some of these strategies and some of the research that they did. So you also had what's known as Operation Mockingbird, and Operation Mockingbird started in the 50s with the CIA, where they learned and perfected their craft of using what we now call public relations. It was propaganda, to use the media, the news sources, Hollywood, and entertainment. They used them to help to promote their agenda by shaping public opinion and manipulating the masses. So those were two things, and again, these were all strategies that they were perfecting in the 20th century to push the one world governmental system. Many of the findings that they got through Operation Paperclip and the Nazis and the Rockefeller funded research that they did, they consolidated it in a 1969 memo called the Jaffe Memo. The Jaffe Memo was created by Planned Parenthood and the U.S. Population Control Council. So they took the research, a lot of the research that was done as far as population control and depopulation, and they put it in this memo, and they presented it actually to Congress, the U.S. Congress. And in the memo, and you're probably familiar with a lot of these strategies. That's why I tell you that the strategies that we see being promoted aren't grassroots, and they're not coincidental or just happen. They are very strategic. So in this memo, some of the strategies for population control was promoting homosexuality, using chemical agents in the water supply to cause sterility, and it also is a form of like a chemical lobotomy. So some of these chemicals they put in the water, if you're not familiar with a lobotomy is something that if you have someone who's really aggressive, like they would have criminals back in the day, they would give them a lobotomy and they would clip the one in their frontal lobe that causes or controls aggression, and then these people will become very complacent. So they also have a way of certain chemicals that cause a type of a chemical lobotomy, which means it keeps people from being too aggressive. And when I say aggressive, I mean, like, for instance, some of the injustices that's being exposed when you share it with people and they're very complacent, or they're like, man, somebody ought to do something, but they would never do anything. Some of that is chemically imposed. But the sterility agents in the water, if you think about Flint, Michigan, this is one of the things that I believe it's when their strategies get exposed, because in Flint, Michigan, it was reported that they knew that the chemicals were there for some time, but nobody did anything or said anything. And of course, why is that? Why would someone have all this, these poisonous chemicals in the water and not be concerned or not blow the alarm, sound the alarm for them? A lot of it can be, it could follow after the narrative that this is part of the population control. And of course, Flint, Michigan, and some of these other places in Michigan are heavily populated by minority populations. And so again, all this stuff goes right back to what we were talking about. They also encouraging delayed marriages. So and also abortion on demand, and to promote abortion on demand as a viable birth control method. And so that's why the mainstream media is really, they push this agenda that if you're pro-life and you believe that abortion shouldn't be legal in America because you believe it's killing babies, then they call you sexist, or they'll say you're trying to tell a woman what to do with their body, or you're trying to be oppressive. And that's not the case on my part as well. I believe that abortion, that every single person has a God-given destiny ordained by the Most High God, that they have a purpose, that they have value. Every person, every single person, whether you are the richest man in the world, the smartest man in the world, or the dumbest man in the world, you still have value that was given by God. If a person is born with birth defects or something like that, it doesn't make them less valuable as a person. And when we start to look at people as being more valuable or less valuable, then that's when we come into this this wickedness that we see. Because I was surprised that a lot of times when I shared with people about the eugenics thing and how they didn't want people, black families to have a bunch of babies, a lot of people said, yeah, that's good, then they shouldn't have a bunch of babies. But I'm saying, if you start to devalue other people based on what you think is valuable or what society says is valuable, then you're missing the point, because everybody has value. Everybody has the opportunity to do something great in this world and to impact others. So this mentality that we employ or we allow, it's becoming more and more pervasive, and is spilling over into the culture as a whole. And especially when you think about how we devalue life in the black community in some of these urban areas, that you have really high rates of homicide and all these other crazy things that happen. So, and to me, that's devaluing human life, and every single life should be considered as valuable as the next. So, the other part of their strategy is destroying national sovereignty and skewing the lines between nations. And if you look at this open borders policy that they have, and they're trying to push it in the United States, we don't have it here. But in Europe, they had open border policy. That's part of the New World Order agenda, and is devastating Europe. In Germany and in Sweden and some of these other places, in France, they have overrun of the Muslim population. And a lot of these people aren't good people. So when they come into the city, in Sweden, they had, last I heard, they have like 50 no-go zones. So they have these groups of Muslim jihadists. I don't know if you want to call them jihadists, but they're Muslims that actually control these areas. They are employing Sharia law, and the police can't even go in these areas. So it's an epidemic in many of these European countries. And, the women are being raped. This is widely reported on European news stations. The women are being raped and just mistreated all the way around. And I believe ultimately we can look at this overall globalist strategy and see how this is part of their plan to destroy sovereign nations. Excuse me. So when they destroy sovereign nations, and it makes way for a new world order, one world governmental system, they're going to, their plan is to section off the world in 10 sections, which makes it easier to manage. And they would all answer to the one world governmental system, the head, which the Bible says will be the Antichrist. So communism is the tool, as I mentioned earlier, but communism got a bad name because of people like Stalin and Lenin and some of these other people. They got a really bad name, and so they use a different strategy. So now socialism is part of, socialism's goal is communism, and communism's goal is a one world governmental system. So a lot of places there, just like in America, you had Bernie Sanders, who was a socialist. He ran as a socialist, and he got a lot of votes and got a lot of support. And I think it's because the propaganda, the public relations campaign that the New World Order people have been practicing is really working. they're really being successful with what they're doing. So socialism and communism, the cover story for both of them is that they are trying to empower the workers of the world. So that was the thing of communism. They're supposed to be, so that's where you get the fist sign, you know, empowering the working class. But that's not accurate. What communism does is it just changes power from a ruling elite class, which was a monarchy or something like that, to this communist government, which now becomes the ruling class. And the problem with it is that it becomes aggressively oppressive. It becomes more and more oppressive to the place where not only is it just exchange power and you still have a ruling elite class with the communists, but there is no upward mobility. So for instance, in communism, if you think about we have, let me give you an example. We had Mike Tyson, who was the heavyweight champ, and in his career, I think they said he made around $250 million, right? He came from nothing. He was basically an orphan. Custom Model took him in. He became very wealthy. During those times when the Soviet Union was around, you had Soviet Union boxers that were great boxers, but because of the communist society, they never were able to make money. They were fighting for the state. So the government actually, they fought for them. They didn't get to keep any of their money. So that's how it works. So what communism does is it steals people's talents and their abilities, and the government takes it, and the people don't get any type of benefit from it, right? Not the individual. You know, you've had very good tennis players that came from Russia back in the days, and they would compete sometimes on the international stage, but they couldn't get any money for themselves. And so they're competing against someone who's a multi-millionaire, and they have nothing because they work for a communist governmental regime. So socialism leads to communism, and communism's end goal is a one-world governmental system. When communists take over, they disguise themselves as the Workers' Party, and they wanted to overthrow the cruel dictators of Europe and Asia. But in essence, the only thing that communism does is replace oppressive rulers of nations with another more oppressive governmental rule. Whether it's the Bolsheviks in Russia, or was the Bolshevik Revolution, in Russia, they overthrew the czars, and then you had the Soviet Union that came in that was a really wicked and crazy country. You had Mao Zedong in China, and he overthrew the governmental system, and he started the communist China government. And of course, you know, historically that millions and millions of people died under his regime. You had Pol Pot in Cambodia, and Pol Pot was the same thing. He had to overthrow. He came into power, and then millions of people died because of the wickedness of these people. You know what they say, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. In America, you had communism creeping into the country in the 1950s, and you had Senator Joseph McCarthy, who was really exposing a lot of the communists, and people were getting blackballed and things of that nature. And what the communists were doing is they were trying to influence things behind the scenes, and of course they used the media, athletics, and all that other stuff. They also really tried to get on board with the civil rights movement in order to cause a race riots and national unrest so that they can come in and seize power. So then you also had socialism. Socialism crept into the country. So socialism through FDR. FDR had what's called the New Deal, and that was after the Great Depression. And many people believe that it was the international bankers that helped to initiate the Great Depression. And that's very realistic if you understand all the background. I don't have time to go into it, but that's one of my theories as well. Is that's how it went down, because you had in 1913 the Federal Reserve Act that gave power to the Federal Reserve, which is a private bank in America, and that charter was good for like 20 years. So then in 1920 and 1929, I think it was, you had the stock market crash. The United States government had to file for bankruptcy, and then you had the Federal Reserve that came in as the executor to the bankruptcy. So then that gave power to the Federal Reserve over the United States government. Then you have FDR, who comes with what's called the New Deal, and the New Deal actually brought in a lot of socialism programs or socialistic programs. And coincidentally enough, FDR's name is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Delano, who was his mother's maiden name, was interconnected with these Illuminati families. So you know, it's quite possible that was all orchestrated behind the scenes. The motto of the Illuminati, one of the Rockefellers, is quoted as saying, "Never let a good crisis go to waste. Never let a good crisis go to waste." And so they create crises, and then they have the solution. It's called the Hegelian dialectic. So they behind the scenes, they initiate the problem, and then they give you the solution to the problem. They use economic disasters as a means to begin to implement socialism under the guise of helping the poor and the needy. So in the 1960s, later on, you have LBJ. He created what's called the Great Society. And within the Great Society, he created what's called the War on Poverty. And on the surface, it looked like a good thing, but that was 50 years ago, and $22 trillion later, now you have a higher percentage of Americans on public assistance than there was when the war started. So when you really look at the strategy of socialism, it makes sense that they would implement these socialistic programs, and that people would think that it's to benefit the working class and the middle class. But in essence, what it does is it creates more dependency on the government, and it gives the government more control over the lives of the people. And that's the ultimate goal behind the scenes of socialism. The reason behind these strategies was to weaken the family, to convince the masses to trust and rely on the government instead of the natural patriarchal family structure. So naturally, you had a certain family structure that you have mother and father in the nuclear family. And the nuclear family, which is, like the Bible says, one man, one woman, raising their children in the bond of marriage, that has historically, and every form of research on psychology shows that the nuclear family creates healthier individuals, which creates a healthier society. And so the powers that be that understand that, they know that one of the biggest hindrances to them promoting what they're trying to promote is the nuclear family. So the war on poverty helps to attack the war on, attack the family structure. It creates people that are more and more dependent on the government, weaker families, and that are easier to control and to manipulate. The programs have had the greatest impact, negative impact, on the black family. The black family has been devastated by the social programs along with the war on drugs, which targeted black males for incarceration, therefore causing the black family to depend on the government even more. So soon after the war on poverty, you have the war on crime, or the war on drugs. And you know, some of the reports with Oliver North and during the George H.W. Bush CIA, he was one of the directors of the CIA. They found that there was people complicit into bringing drugs into the community, into the country, and they were finding their way into, you know, certain minority communities. So the black family has been devastated through social programs along with the war on drugs. The war on drugs targeted black males for incarceration, and so even though black and Hispanic males only represent 25% of the population, 58% of all those incarcerated are black or Hispanic in America. So it targeted the males, and it was documented that they got more time, and so that even caused the family to break down even more. So what this is the globalists describe it as a revolution without tears. It's a silent coup, if you will, and the liberals and the progressives, primarily the Democrats, are the one who has taken this strategy and really pushed it over the last 50 years. The strategy of trying to push for a one-world governmental system, the progressives and the Democrat and the liberals, and a lot of times they're one and the same, but they are the ones who are really pushing this globalist New World Order agenda. And a lot of times what happens is the people on the ground level may or may not really understand the overall strategy. So you have people that are sincerely these people what they call social justice warriors, and so they're sincere in trying to help the poor and the needy out, but they don't understand the ultimate goal behind these things. So the powers that be, the people at the top, understand what they're doing, and so they set up these programs as a way to keep people oppressed and in bondage. They will never elevate out of their situation, save a few small amounts of them. You know, you think about a lot of these urban areas, the majority of people that make it out of there are people that are either good athletes and become professional athletes, or they're good musicians or something of that nature, but not as many have ever made it out through other means. And then they get you to, you know, sign on the dotted line, and then you become a part of their conspiracy as well. So it increased government dependency of black community while destroying personal responsibility and accountability. It's handicapped and enabled the black family, causing them to have complete loyalty to the progressive left Democrats. Because anytime whoever is funding or supporting your family, for the most part, you will become loyal to them. So when they set up this scenario where they are, in essence, funding the family, helping to raise the children, supporting the household, then there's a natural loyalty that happens. And so even at the detriment of themselves, they will support. Black people have supported the Democrats unapologetically because of this mass manipulation that has occurred. So here's the stats that show, just as in the last 50 years, in the 1960s, only 22% of unwed pregnancies were in the black community. Only 22% of the births in the black community were of unwed mothers. Only 22% in the 60s. Now in 2018, it is 72% out of wedlock pregnancies. So you see it's almost inverted completely. It's over 3 times higher than what it was just since the 1950s. Before that, it was 22%. Now people will say racism and all these other things, but you think about, you had slavery, you had Jim Crow, you had blatant racism in America. Black people were in poverty for the most part. And so that's not the reason for the breakdown of the family. That's not the reason for the high crime and incarceration rates. All studies show that it's the breakdown of the family that causes environment that fosters these things. If you look at every major city in America that's run by liberal left-leaning Democrats, you have high unwed pregnancy rates, you have low academic performance in schools, and some inner city school districts, I should say, have as high as a 62% dropout rate. I know in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, it was published in the paper, they have a 38% graduation rate. 38%, which means 62% don't finish school. And you think about, in this day and age, if you don't at least finish high school, the chances of you being successful in life are very slim. And so if you have these black males who have energy, they go out and they make babies, they're going to do something a lot of times to help feed their family or get the material things that they want. And if they can't get the opportunity through their careers, they're going to do it through other means. So it's a natural progression. It's a natural cycle that happens when you have these families broke down. Drugs and gang violence are very, very, very prevalent in these same cities that we're talking about. I was looking at this chart, and they were talking about the poorest cities in America. And if you look at the poorest cities in America, all of them are run by Democrats. And these aren't just new democratic cities. They've been democratic cities for a long, long time. Because, as I told you, the ultimate strategy of the global elite is to help to cause people to be dependent upon the government. And then once they do that and they crash the economies, it gets more dependence on the government, and then ultimately people will depend on this one world governmental system as the nation begins to deteriorate. So this has been Dr. Joe Green. I wanted to give you some insight, and I try not to give too much information to overwhelm you, but I also try to make sure that I'm thorough and that you understand that the things that I'm telling you are not things that are just rumors or speculation, but they are actually well researched, and so that you can have your eyes open and see all the strategy and the plan of the enemy. Till next time, bless you. I love you. Shalom, shalom.
The Fabian Society was born in London in the late 19th century. The founding members were a small group of middle-class radicals. These journalists, clerks, and civil servants were restless with the inadequacies of Western society and searching for something new. They wanted to remake the world in a more equitable way, heavily influenced by socialist thinkers of the time. This group had grand ideas for a progressive future. They knew that lasting change in Western countries could only come via catastrophe or a slow and gradual process. The founding members recognized that long-term success would best be achieved by reserving a low-key respectability. Working with sympathetic members of the media, they promoted themselves as a quiet intellectual group. They also sought to protect this reputation by the public excommunication of one member. Havelock Ellis, a man committed to sexual revolution long before the term or idea had been invented. The core ideas to recast society were agreed on and distilled into a manifesto called The Basis. Belief in these primary ideas was the minimum requirement for membership. It did not preclude other socialist ideas or objectives, but prioritized the core principles. The Fabian Society consists of socialists. It therefore aims at the reorganization of society by the emancipation of land and industrial capital from individual and class ownership. If it sounds similar to communism, that's because it is. The Fabians' aim was to slowly shepherd the world toward a socialist future. But unlike the communists, the Fabians knew that this could be achieved bloodlessly and over time. The society took its name from the ancient Roman general, who was famed for his delaying tactics. Fabius Maximus, the Concator, did not have enough men to defeat the invading Hannibal in southern Italy. So he fought a slow war of attrition, whereby the Romans avoided open battle and wore down the Carthaginian army over many years. And so it was for the new socialist organization. They adopted the name and the tactics of the great Roman general. Along with that name, they chose an angry tortoise as their mascot, with the motto, "I wait long, but when I strike hard." For a clearer idea of the Fabians' revolutionary spirit, we can look at the stained glass window commissioned in 1910, which is now located at the London School of Economics. The window shows two leading members reforging the world nearer to their heart's desire, and the assorted founding members praying to a stack of their holy scriptures, or tracts and essays. It's important to note that the Fabian coat of arms was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and the religious overtones of the window. The original members were quickly joined by other radicals who shared their worldview. Featured in the Fabian window, George Bernard Shaw and Sidney Webb quickly rose to leadership within the fledgling organization. Webb committed all his time and energy to the Fabian goals after marrying his rich wife Beatrice Potter. As an economist and political scientist, he produced a vast amount of the written Fabian works, including The History of Trade Unionism, which Lenin later translated into Russian. Shaw joined the Fabian Society shortly after its inception, long before he found critical acclaim as a playwright. Regarded as a brilliant polemicist and debater, the Fabians saw in Shaw the perfect man to help propagate and defend British socialism, along with two later additions, the future Fabian missionary to the US, Graham Wallas, and the well-connected civil servant, Sidney Oliver. These four were the leading lights of British socialist thought and action for the next 30 years. And that thought and action did not just thrive in Britain. Using tactics later copied by other Marxist groups, the Fabians exported their sinister brand of socialism all over the world.